GetLoveDreamingPeach.com. I am doing a little intro with some screenshots that I took throughout the day. There's John O'Keefe's mother. Rest in peace, John O'Keefe. Justice for John O'Keefe and his family. Here is Lieutenant Gallagher. And I took some screenshots of Alan Jackson looking kind of like an angry bully IMO, in my opinion, trying to make it seem as if these witnesses are lying, are shady. A lot of people are buying it, but I'm not. A lot of people seem to believe the lies. Well, what I think are lies. There was Trooper Garino. He came back and he read out all of those very cringe calls, missed calls, and also at the end of this video, I play some clips that I screen recorded throughout the day that I thought were relevant and important. So this is going to be about an hour. You can't see it that well, but I also play Trooper Garino reading out all those missed calls and the voicemails, and maybe I'm crazy. I'm in the 20%. According to the chats, I'm in 20% that think that she's guilty versus 80% that believe that she's being set up. But I feel like those numbers are totally skewed. I don't know how, I don't know when, I don't know why, but something's telling me she's going to be found guilty this time. Minimum of vehicular manslaughter. Maybe she'll get 5 years, and she'll be out in 5 years. You think so? I just cannot imagine people are going to say she's not guilty with all of this evidence. The chat's 80% skewed to saying that they don't see evidence and they think she's innocent, which I find mind-boggling, insane, not believable. They must be bots, although one of them said, hey, I'm not a bot, which, a bot could probably respond, I'm not a bot. But anyway, what do you think? I'm very grateful that I haven't been overrun by pro-Karen people in my chat, and so far only people who think she's guilty have commented, but I don't know what that means. GetLoveDreamingPeach.com.
Please note auto-generated captions may have typos. Typos, yo.
Karen Reed trial day 10. It's about to begin in about an hour. I have a lot of work to do today, and I will definitely be watching. So I just wanted to pop in because what I'm going to do today is like what I did yesterday, where I'm going to watch the trial, and then whenever there's a break, I'll make a note, and then I'll compile all my notes into one long video, and I'll share it tonight. At least that's my goal. I do have work to do for clients, so I have to prioritize that today. But I'll be watching the trial all day and making my notes about the witnesses, their testimony, my thoughts, etc. Can you tell that it's raining? So it's been raining all night, and you can see it behind me a little bit. So it's a good day to be in the house doing some work, watching a trial. So join me. Don't forget to hit share, hit like, hit subscribe, and hit the bell notification so you always get the latest drop. Also, if you want to join as a member, I have been dropping some early drops for members. So sometimes I'll be working on a video and I'm not fully ready to drop it, but I'll drop a portion or an early draft for members. And I also have some members only content. Like yesterday, I screen recorded the entire Katie McLaughlin testimony, and then I put it together as a members only video, even though it's free on YouTube, but because I compiled just her testimony and I shared it as a standalone. All right. See you soon. Oh boy. Let me turn this on. Yikes. Karen is cooked. This day so far, it's 12:57 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time right now. They are on lunch. I've caught up to where they're at, as much as I was trying to delay. I have a lot of work to do to get to today, but I did take a bunch of notes, and I'm going to go through them. Wowzy, wowzy. Let's see. I have some. I took a lot of notes, so before I read them all, I just want to go through the highlights. I'm shocked she's cooked. That was after they played 2 clips of her. A clip of her talking about John took her glass from the SUV from the bar with her vodka tonic. Clip number 2. Karen on an interview admitting she thought that she clipped him. He was right where I left him, she said. Yikes. Okay, another starred comment. Makes the case to me more that John landed on the grass and lay there all night outside, which was when Alessi was questioning Mr. Gilman, the snow and ice expert, about how much snow had fallen by midnight, by 3 a.m., by 6 a.m. And then Lally redirected Gilman to answer the question about how could you see something 30 feet away if you were looking for it, even though visibility is, or, when visibility is 1.2 miles or 1.5 miles, and then somehow he never actually answered that. But then Lally redirected to say, wouldn't 30 feet be impacted by light, night, obstructions, etc.? Yes. To quote Heather Gay, Real Housewives of Salt Lake City finale and reunion, receipts, proof, timeline, screenshots, fucking everything! That is what they brought. Oh my God. Oh my Jesus. Woo, chat. Mr. Gallagher changed my mind about the leaf blower being used and the solo cups. Again, not your top choice of evidence collecting. However, when you have the option of let it get snowed on by a blizzard and lost, probably forever, or severely damaged and hindered, if not lost forever, or use what the fuck you can with what you got right there, because it's a fucking blizzard, it's an emergency. And as Alessi pointed out, at the time that Lieutenant Gallagher was doing this collection and trying to get through the snow to see what they could find before it got blasted, there was about 3.94 inches of snow. And by 6 or 7 p.m. that night, it was, from what I had reported earlier, it was about 21 to 24 inches of snow that fell over there. And I think by 7:30 p.m. it was done. But so the evidence, including the glass from the car, from the bar, which they tried to say, did you go look in the house? Did you get a search warrant to go check if they had glasses that matched that glass? And he said, no, I wouldn't. I couldn't. And Alan Jackson tried to make it seem as if he should have, and he can't get in trouble for trying to get a search warrant for something like that. And Lieutenant Gallagher pushed back and said, you can absolutely get in trouble for that. A lot. Brady violations, Giglio violations, your credibility, your ability to be a witness, your ability to do your job, your ability to be taken seriously, and on and on and on. He said there are a lot of issues with lying. He said, I would have had to lie and to twist what wasn't there to get a warrant. But these pro Karen Reed fanatics, they don't seem to care about logic. They have this vision in their head of this horrific, disgusting event that is literally made up by defense and Karen. And now, my gosh, the way that Brennan is laying this out, I'm not going to say that Lally is a bad prosecutor, but I will definitely say that he seems to be questioning certain experts about very technical stuff. And I will say, I think that that's where he's really good. He's good with that. He's good with this like technical kind of drawn out, slow thing. But Brennan is amazing. If Brennan is the one who has decided how to outline this thing, how to put the witnesses in order, how to present the evidence, where to drop little clips, what witnesses to ask what questions, and how to lay out the chronological events of that evening. Like he said when he brought back Trooper Garino, I said gut-wrenching. Extraction reports from Mr. O'Keefe's phone. He recalled the officer again. The text chain between John and Kaylee, which I guess they're not going to read in. I really want to know what that says. Dang. From January 28th, 2022 to January 29th, 2022. Maybe because she's a minor, they won't read it in, but I really wish they would. Then phone calls plus voicemails from the defendant, Karen Reed, to John O'Keefe from John's phone. Phone call records, voicemails, text messages put in chronological order in a motherfucking PowerPoint presentation. Okay, and then he started to read them out. Oh my fucking God. I actually feel bad because I'm not a sadist. I don't enjoy people destroying their own lives or committing murder. I don't enjoy seeing somebody suffer. Like I saw somebody say, this is the gift that keeps on giving. How the fuck could you say that? This is a tragedy that never ends for many people. All right, I'm going to continue my thoughts. Okay, trial is done for the day. And I will say, we need some of that. Some vegan butter. We need some earth balance. Balance. Okay. So this is my second clip of the day. So second impression of the day is chat is psycho. The chat on Law and Crime, the chat on Crime TV, the chat on Boston 10, the chat in Emily D. Baker. Psycho motherfuckers. Drinking the Kool-Aid. There was, maybe 20% of the people in each of those chats that maybe I'm a crazy one. Maybe I'm a crazy one. Because me and a minority of people seem to see what I see. Listening to those voicemails, listening to how many times she called him, she texted him, putting the pieces of all those calls and those texts from earlier in the day, knowing that she was trying to cheat on him for a whole month with his own friend, probably trying to frame Brian Higgins, probably trying to make John jealous, probably God knows what. Also, by the way, I have to remember, I've been slamming down on the table a lot, and I got to stop doing that. All right, so let me go back to my... Okay, so when they started in the morning, Judge Cannoni said they streamlined some things in the morning. Then Lieutenant Gallagher was the first witness. Alan Jackson cross-examined him. The search at the scene, engaging the leaf blower, the berm, B-U-R-M, the berm, the curb, the Cape Cod curb, the curbing, the berm. They did not find a hat. I said no hat, no shoe. 50 square foot area down to the lawn. Only discovered the glass and the blood sampling. He did not search the house for the matching glass. Brian, being a cop, had nothing to do with it because of no search, not because of being a lieutenant or a cop. Okay, then Alan Jackson had referenced Deputy Chief Keller, but Lieutenant Gallagher said actually he was Lieutenant Keller. He got the solo cups from him. He didn't have a Ring camera. He had an Arlo camera. And Lieutenant Gallagher said that he knew that because him and Detective or Lieutenant Keller had bought their cameras at around similar times and had talked to each other about it, and that he had actually picked up some packages for Keller a couple times, and he knew what the camera was angled at, and he knew because of that camera wasn't going to see anything all the fuck over there. My words. Okay. They asked him questions about the Sallyport, the SUV questions. They recused themselves from the investigation, including taking photos because of the Canton connection. When the investigation started, they were spitballing possibilities, and, quote, getting into a fight was just one of those spitballed ideas as how he might have ended up there. There was not a single witness who had suggested it. It was just a general idea. And there was no evidence whatsoever to corroborate that idea. No one in the house was an actual witness or an eyewitness. An eyewitness is someone who actually has to be there and to see the thing. In order to search someplace, you need a search warrant. In order to get a search warrant, you need reasonable cause. In order to have reasonable cause, you have to have some actual cause. Someone being on a lawn, a large lawn, not what Karen Reed said, a postage stamp. A large 100 by 75 foot lawn or bigger. And I mean, I just have to say, I'm just interjecting on myself, sidebar. The amount of comments that I have seen today making excuses for the bullshit and trying to excuse away, to explain away, to, wash away all the freaking evidence against this woman. It's so sickening. It is sickening to me. There is a man who is dead and a family who is grieving, children who were being raised by this man after they had become orphaned at 3 and 6 years old. A woman who lost her daughter in a tragic, awful, quick way, finding out she had some tumor, I think, and then 5 months later she's dead. A young, new mother. And then her son-in-law, the father of her grandchildren, dies. And then 9 years later, her other son dies, the one who's taking care of those kids. And yet people have nothing but vitriol and hatred for this woman who's done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong, but want justice for what happened to her son. And people will, the fact that people are willing to believe every single defense talking point, Kool-Aid, crazy, delusional, fabricated fantasy, far-reaching into the Netflix season 10 writers' insanity, bargain basement bin bullshit. What? This red string, nailed to the wall with nails going in every direction of this fabricated flimsy. The fact that Katie McLaughlin knew the girl, the woman who grew up in the house, who probably didn't even live there anymore years ago, and they were friends, mutual friends, and they'd been to events and groups together. That's evidence to you that she would lie to put a woman in jail. What you're accusing Katie of is such a despicable thing that she would lie about a woman claiming, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. You what? I hit him. All for what? Because she knew a girl? There's no evidence of it. Just because somebody knew somebody is not evidence of it. And even the leaf blower and the solo cups, second time around, so somebody asked in the comments, did you watch the trial? Yeah, I watched the trial and I made a video about it every freaking day. Doing my homework, analyzing it, thinking about it, being introspective, self-reflective, really thinking about the questions, really wondering, is this woman innocent? How awful would that be if this woman was innocent and they Jedi mind tricked her into running around like a lunatic saying, could I have hit him? I hit him. I hit him. Did I hit him? They Jedi mind tricked her into saying on an interview that she was expecting to find him on the side of the road. They got her to self-incriminate saying, could I have clipped him? Could I have hit him in the knee? Did I run over his foot? He was right there where I left him. And yet somehow that spins into these totally apparently innocent people beat a cop to death in their basement for what purpose? And then they somehow magically knew exactly, like literally exactly where she dropped him off. And they also somehow magically had his phone out there all night, which was obvious by the temperature data of the phone, which proved that it never went inside the house, even if those bubbles of possibility of where he might have been showed that he could have maybe gone into the corner of the house, except for actually no, he didn't, because the temperature of the phone showed that no, it never did. And people want to lie. People literally writing in comments, there was no evidence that he was hit by a car. But that's a lie. He had a cracked skull. He had black eyes. He had scrape on his knee. There were pieces of taillight in his shirt sleeve. How come nobody is acknowledging that? What about the fact that he was dead? Isn't being dead a pretty good sign of some bodily injury? You're dead. That's a sign of an injury. There was blood. His skull was cracked. His shoe was in the berm. And these people are like, you seriously believe that every single one of these witnesses is lying? What did Karen Reed do that made her such an enormous person that this many people would want to take her down? Really? That's what you really believe? You really believe that much of a conspiracy? I don't know. You know, some people just like, I'm just flabbergasted. I cannot stop saying how flabbergasted I am about how many people are willing to believe that 50 plus people are lying and that this one person is not lying. This one person. Okay, so here's a few more thoughts. I wrote a lot of notes today. I'm trying to get this done quickly, but I have a lot of notes, so let's see how fast I can talk. One of the things that really bothers me is that all of the defense talking points seem to then later come out as something that Karen already knew isn't true. And while there are some sycophants, fanatics, free Karen Reed psychopaths in the comments saying things like, you know, whatever, every single piece of evidence doesn't matter. Those video clips of her don't matter. They don't move the needle. Or in Law and Crime, they did a poll. I was so flabbergasted. Like, how is this even real? Am I living in opposite worlds? Because how am I seeing the things that I'm seeing and hearing people say? I feel like you must be trolling. Like, they have to be trolling because there's no way this is true. They played Karen Reed's insane, stalker, crazy, psycho voicemails. They read out, or I should say Trooper Garino read out how many missed calls and then voicemails, and they played the voicemails from 12:30, the moment that I believe that Karen Reed hit John, and she literally called him, oh wait, let me see, I wrote it down. Please hold. She had called him over 36 times, and by the time she called Jen, so after her call to Jen, she continued calling John. She continued to call John 52 times. She had called John 36 times. Almost every minute she was calling him. Then she was leaving these horrific voicemails, screaming, I fucking hate you, John! John, I fucking hate you! You're a fucking pervert! Then from 1:18 a.m. to 4:28 a.m., there was a 3-hour and 10-minute pause of her calls. And then she started to call back again. After call number 36 to John was when she called Jen. She called, I think call 36 was at 4:52 or 4:53 a.m. and she called, or 4:52 a.m. and she called Jen at 4:53 a.m. Then I believe she called Kerry. She continued to call John's phone like crazy throughout the whole rest of the morning up until 6:03 a.m. where she was heard on John's voicemail, the 52nd call from 12:30 p.m. a.m. midnight. The 52nd call, the 8th voicemail, where she was screaming, having found him, she was screaming, Carrie, 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 Jen, 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 Jen. And you could hear Jen calling 911, trying to calm down Karen, trying to find blankets frantically, trying to help John. And you put that into context that she was supposed to, at that moment, stop everything and go running into her sister's house? That would have made no sense. So back to what I was saying about Alan Jackson is that there he is trying to make it seem as if the glass that was found on the ground by Lieutenant Gallagher, did you go question them in the house to find out if they had a glass like that? No. I had no reasonable cause to do that. Then he starts pushing Gallagher, saying, you can't get in trouble for asking for a warrant. And then Gallagher pushes back. I screen recorded that, and I screen recorded Garino, and I'm going to put those clips at the end of this video. And he was like, absolutely, you can get in trouble for that. Then the prosecution plays a clip of Karen saying on an interview of her own choosing, John took my glass that I took from the bar. He always does that. My gin and tonic. No, my vodka tonic. So she knew fucking damn well, because she had admitted it in a video on an interview, that John had taken her glass out of the car. But she's got her defense sitting there trying to accuse a lieutenant doing his job that day of doing the wrong thing, of being a criminal, of being a co-conspirator in a huge frame job where he did not question people, and he didn't go into a house, and he didn't investigate, and he didn't go into the basement looking for blood because they got some part of their basement floor changed, and people believe that that's proof, that's evidence of a murder. But just because, like I saw somebody comment, getting home repair is not a crime. And somebody said in a comment somewhere, well, they did it 3 years before. You ever heard of flooding? You ever heard of a big basement and maybe they didn't do the entire thing? You ever heard of you don't know what the fuck you're talking about? You're just going off your defense lunatic bullshit? That's what it seems like to me, especially when you realize that here you've got Alan Jackson trying to make it seem like Lieutenant Gallagher is a bad cop. He's a bad detective. He's on the pay, I guess, you know, not investigating things because it's his buddy. He didn't investigate Brian Higgins because it's his buddy. He didn't get the, you know, ring camera. It wasn't ring camera, it was Arlo camera from his friend because it was his buddy. So basically you're saying that in order for you to believe all this, every single thing that a person says you don't believe, unless it's Alan Jackson, Karen Reed, or Yannetti, you only believe their spin. Even though they then have a video proving Karen Reed literally saying out of her own mouth with her own words that John took that glass from her car, from her vehicle. But yet Alan Jackson is going to sit there and try to accuse someone who appears to be a decent man, a hardworking man, of doing something nefarious when they know damn well that that's a lie. Okay? Then they play the clip of Karen in an interview admitting she thought she clipped him. And I wrote, I'm shocked. She's cooked. She thought maybe she ran over his foot. She said they found him right where I left him. Okay. But they framed her. They made her say that somehow magically. Okay. Then they brought out Mr. Robert Gilman, the meteorologist, snow and ice consulting. Right, Karen says, he was right where I left him. Gilman speaking about visibility, snow and ice info, snow and ice management concerns. He's been doing that specific thing since 2016. For over 45 years, from 1979 to 1980, he discussed the snow and the ice measurements of the day of that area, the ground temperature, which was very important, and he talked about the highs and the lows of the air and the ground, and basically testifying that the ground was hard and frozen and they couldn't dig it. Couldn't dig it. Dig it. You dig. Okay. And there was a very hot moment when, going back to Gallagher, when he fought back and said, you know, I would lose all credibility if I fabricated and made up and twisted false things, made up lies to get a search warrant that wasn't justified. Okay, so more. All right, then Attorney Brennan recalled Officer Garino. They talked about extraction reports of Mr. O'Keefe's phone.
Auto-generated. Captions may have typos.
They entered into evidence without reading them, so the jurors will get to read it and we won't. A text chain between John and Kaylee, his niece/daughter, because he adopted her, not because of something gross. And those text chain was between him and his niece on January 28th, 2022 to January 29th, 2022. And remember, that morning he had been texting with Karen. Well, Karen was texting and calling him relentlessly, and he was saying, please stop. I'm with Kaylee. I'm with the kids. We'll talk later. And he wouldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. I mean, excuse me. She wouldn't stop. She wouldn't stop. She kept calling and calling and calling and texting and texting. And he kept sending us a voicemail saying, please stop calling. I'm with the kids. So what did they say to each other that last very fatal day for John? I wish we could find out, but we probably never will because she's a minor, or she was a minor at the time. I think she's still a minor. I think she's 17. Then they had phone calls, voicemails from the defendant, Karen Reed, to John O'Keefe from John's phone call records, voicemails, text messages, put in chronological order in a PowerPoint. Like I said, receipts, proof, timeline, screenshots, fucking everything. Yeah, and yet these sycophants up in the chat are still like, she's innocent. Oh, that's what I was saying. The poll on Law and Crime was like, do you think these phone calls and voicemails helped Karen or hurt Karen? And 80% said helped. At this point, I honestly think that the 80% of these fucking crazy psycho bitches who are out here loving Karen are psycho bitches who would behave like Karen. And that's why they think it's okay. And that's why they're willing to throw everybody under the bus, 50 people, all claiming that they're conspiring against her and stuff. It's like, you must all be malignant narcissists with delusions of grandeur if you believe this, because it is insane. You don't believe this woman's own words? How, again, for the 80th time, how did they Jedi mind trick her into saying all those things? How did they frame her into that? Then I already said I feel bad for her. I do feel bad for her. You know, this is a terrible thing. Trooper Garino. Let's see, at 12:36 and 39 seconds, Karen connected to John's router at his home. Again, it was a 6-minute drive. She called John at 12:30, was that first phone call that they went over. And so she's calling nonstop while she's driving back to his house. And if she left him there at 12:30, 6 minutes later, arriving at his house makes perfect sense. That's what the directions say. It takes 6 minutes, and that's not even driving that fast. Okay? So that's believable. To me, that's proof that she could have hit him in the time frame and made it back to his house. Then Trooper Garino said that you can connect, when you're outside, you can connect your home router 350 feet out away, or definitely in the driveway. Then they start playing those voicemails. John, I fucking hate you at 12:41 a.m. You're a fucking pervert. Okay, then, wait, did I talk about the visibility? I did. I gotta start using just one side of this notebook because I keep getting confused. Then after call number 36, she calls Jen. Voicemail number 8 was the noise and the background of Karen screaming, Carrie, Carrie, and Jen's 911 call. At 6:03:02 a.m., the defendant is heard on John's voicemail screaming. It's gut-wrenching. The windshield wipers are on the background. And then I wrote my notes while listening to this. They should sue Karen, they being all these people that she's been pointing fingers at, the Alberts, the McCabe's, Kerry Roberts, all of these people. They should sue Karen Reed in civil court for all this bullshit. Carrie, Jen. That's what my thoughts were. Okay, and then I'm almost done with my notes. No questions from Alessi for Trooper Garino after he read out all those missed calls and played those voicemails. Insane chat claiming that these calls are good for Karen. You must be stalker motherfuckers if you think that, because if you would behave that way, yikes, you should go to jail too. I doubt genuinely, these are my thoughts, I doubt genuinely at this point that the jury is as psycho as these chats. I am truly disgusted by the comments of so many convinced that Karen is innocent, and all of these decent, good, honest, in my opinion, people are answering and reporting truthfully on events I said, well, you stupid motherfuckers make up total, while y'all stupid motherfuckers make up totally crazy BS. Then Brennan, next witness, Charles Ray, lieutenant. He's been on the Canton Police Department for 25 years. Patrol shift commander shows a portion of the drive to One Meadows Drive. It was very snowy. You could see the broken taillight. And many people in the chat were like, that was such a pointless witness. They did a welfare check. Nobody was home. And when they pulled up behind Karen's car at 5 something in the morning. And there you could see, which I showed on the prior video that I just posted earlier today, which is titled, let's see, Brian Albert testimony T1, which means trial 1. Blizzard conditions, taillight broken, human visual acuity plus hearing averages. And in that video, I show a little graphic of me circling exactly where and why I believe that it's obvious that her taillight is broken. And I think anyone who says that they can't see it, you're just lying, you're blind, you're denying it. You are not looking at what's right in front of your face. You're saying it's a blue and black dress when it's obviously gold and gray, gold and white. I don't know. Okay, then Kevin O'Hara, Massachusetts State Police Lieutenant. And that's where I ended my notes because I got in the car to go get my kids after school. And I listened to the rest of it in the car. And they talked about
GetLoveDreamingBeach.com.
Searching shoulder to shoulder in the snow, looking for evidence. They found 7 pieces of taillight. They found his shoe, which was pushed up against the snow in the berm with snow on it, snow on top of it, snow inside of it. And yet again, people were claiming they planted that. How could anybody miss it? It's like everything, all the doubt that I see in the comments, I genuinely believe are these wild goose chase, red herrings, these straw man arguments, these like, you know, like I said, the whole like shebang of pointing in every which direction. But look at what Karen said. Listen to what Karen said. Look at the actual evidence. Are there some people who did some things they shouldn't have done or didn't do some things they should have done? I think so. But I think at the bare minimum, she definitely hit him while she was intoxicated. Maybe not intentionally. Maybe they haven't gotten to the point of proving to me that she meant to do it. But I definitely think she did it, and I think she knew she did it. And I do believe that she will be guilty of counts 2 and 3 and that she will go to jail. I do believe that. That's what I predict. Today, May 6th, Tuesday, May 6th, 2025. My prediction is that Karen Reed is going to be found guilty in this second trial. But I will continue watching, and join me if you'd like to follow along with what I think. Thanks for being here. So, although I said I was done, I actually just wanted to add a few more thoughts to wrap up my thoughts about today. Let me turn this back on. So I'm just listening to Emily D. Baker's going back because I wanted to see, did she change her mind today? So someone had asked her, why wasn't the charge vehicular manslaughter? And she answered that it is the second charge. And then she said,
this is purely a supposition to me. My guess, and this
she said she has a hard time wrapping her head around why they charged second-degree manslaughter or murder.
Is purely.
So she just said that she thinks that when they got into the phone data and they saw all the calls and the text messages between Karen and John, that's when they decided to elevate the charges. And then she just said, I don't necessarily agree with it. Well, I don't know if I think that they have proved, I don't think they've proven it yet. I don't think they've proven it yet that it was elevated to the point of second-degree murder, that she intended it to happen. At this point, barring any insanely new evidence from the defense, because even the ARCA witnesses, as I've pointed out multiple times, and I will continue to point it out, the ARCA witnesses said it's not typical, but possible regarding whether or not he was struck by an SUV. And they also admitted She could have nudged him, aka she could have hit him with her SUV, which would have killed him. So even they did admit it could have happened, but those of Karen, pro-Karen, sycophant loving bootlickers always say in the comments, they said it could not have happened. Not true. They also claim that there's no way humanly possible that his physical injuries could have come from a vehicle. Also, not true. Just simply not true. And another question about if Brennan had doubts of Karen's guilt, would he continue? And Emily rightfully answering, of course, he should not continue. No prosecutor who doubts the guilt of the person they're prosecuting should move forward. Which leads me to believe, which I do believe, they absolutely think that she's guilty. And Emily also said, to paraphrase, maybe they know some shit we don't. You ever think about that? You Karen sycophants? Maybe there's evidence. And yeah, I know they had the first trial, but Lally had no backup then. And there's obviously a lot of evidence. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of things happening. And I will say, I do agree that Lally does not have the mindset the way Brennan seems to, the way Brennan put these witnesses like this, put these clips in here, put this evidence out like this, the way he's laying everything out. Day 10, I am way more convinced that she is going to get a guilty charge at the bare minimum of count 2, which is what if what Emily D. Baker said at the beginning of this trial 2, she said that what she had heard was that 6 to 9 of the jurors from trial 1 were convinced, willing to vote guilty on count 2.
If their memberships, thank you.
Okay, just looking back again at this, what is the minimum and maximum sentence in Massachusetts for vehicular manslaughter with a DUI, also known as an OUI? And the minimum mandatory sentence of 5 years carries a minimum 5 years. Maximum penalty is 20 years in state prison. Potential fine up to $25,000. And so, I don't know if she gets let's see. Oh yeah, I already remember count 3 has a 1 year mandatory minimum and 10-year maximum. Okay, and then what is the minimum and maximum sentence for second-degree murder in Massachusetts? And it says there is, it's life with the possibility of parole after 15 years. There's no minimum sentence, so the maximum penalty is life. So at this point, I'm not convinced she's going to get found guilty of second-degree murder, but I am starting to believe that there's no way any reasonable jury is going to say she's not guilty of hitting him. And again, yeah, the ARCA witnesses can come out and say it's not typical. It's possible, but it's not typical. But again, when you stack evidence, it's not just one thing. It's not just one little thing here, one little thing there. It's a stack of various circumstantial evidence, physical evidence, actual evidence, eyewitnesses, people who saw her, who heard her say the things she said and did that morning, people who evaluated her, people who tested her blood, people who are psychiatric evaluators who evaluated her, friends who were on the receiving end of her calling them, of her dragging them out of their warm, safe, dry homes and beds into the blizzard. It was Karen who was psycho calling him over and over and over. So you want me to believe that Karen didn't hit him. She dropped him off and he walked into the party. He went into a party and she was calling him that many times? Really? So he was at a party with friends and she saw him go into that house and walk into that house. And from the second that he got out of the car at 12:31, from 12:31 up until 6:03, she called him 52 times. And she had called him
29th, 2022.
Yes, I was.
Where did you get the phone call records from?
From John O'Keefe's phone.
Where did you get the voicemails from?
Also from John O'Keefe's phone.
Where did you get the text messages from?
From John O'Keefe's phone.
Did you have an opportunity to take those phone calls, the voice messages, and the text messages and put them in a chronological order?
Yes, I did.
Did you include all of the phone calls, all the text messages, and all of the voicemails?
Between John O'Keefe and the defendant, yes.
Did you create a PowerPoint to put them in a chronological order?
Yes.
May I approach you?
Yes. Show Mr. Leslie.
Sorry.
So I'm going to play these.
12:58:19 a.m. The defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:58:47 a.m. The defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:59:24 a.m. The defendant calls John. Voicemail number 3 is left with voice.
Let's go.
John, I'm here with your fucking kids. Nobody knows where the fuck you are, you fucking pervert.
At 1 a.m. 26 seconds, the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1 a.m. 49 seconds, the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 4 is left. It's 1 second called, no sound.
Let's go.
That was it.
I wonder if she's setting up an alibi or...
The defendant texts John O'Keefe. Kids are cucking alone at 1:02 a.m. on the 29th.
Now, the next text, this is a lie.
Defendant texts John O'Keefe. I'm back in Mansfield. The kids are home alone. 1:04:14 a.m. on the 29th. At 1:10:17 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 5 is left with voice.
Was she
It's coming.
trying to make
Yes,
it
1 in the morning, I'm with your fucking niece and nephew. You fucking pervert. You're a fucking pervert.
At 1:10:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1:12:18 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:12:46 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:13:13 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. Sorry.
24?
At 1:14:11 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:14:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:10 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. At 1:17:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:14:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:10 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. At 1:17:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. So when voicemail 6 is left with voice.
Let's go.
John, I'm going home. I cannot be sitting these. I need to go home. You are fucking using me right now. You're fucking another girl. Kim's sleeping next to me. You're a fucking loser. Fuck yourself.
At 1:18:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. At 4:38:14 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:38:49 a.m., the defendant calls John.
Okay, I had to pause it so I could talk about this. First of all, maybe she really didn't know that she hit him. I could see these being an argument on the side that says, well, look at how she was calling him. This is also what I wanted to talk about. She called him 29 times between 12:30 and 1:18. Then what happened? Did she go to sleep? What was going on? Is this the time when she supposedly was deleting the Ring camera footage that showed her pointing at, well, no, that was earlier. No, that wasn't that. That didn't happen yet. We know, according to Jen McCabe, that she called Jen McCabe at 6:53 a.m. Karen called John's phone 36 times up until that point. And also, so there's this 3 hour and 20-minute gap, which, you know, was she sleeping? Was she passed out? Was she drinking? Who knows? Was she coming up with an alibi? Why did she say she was back in Mansfield when she wasn't? She was at John's. So some people might say she didn't know she hit him. So what I can't understand is if she didn't know she hit him and she thought that he got into the house, why would she call him 29 times? How are you not embarrassed to be that insane that you're calling somebody 29 times knowing that they're at a party? That seems psycho to me. Okay. Also, why was she calling him 29 times? I get it that her voicemail said, "You're a fucking pervert. I fucking hate you. John, you're with another girl. You're using me. You're fucking another girl. You fucking pervert." All the while she's been trying to fuck Brian Higgins. So people who think that this proves she's innocent, I don't know. I think it proves that she's unhinged, that she's doesn't know how to stop, whether it's driving, calling, texting, or God knows what. She doesn't have self-control. She's aggressive. And then the way from 4:38 she calls almost 20 more times, and you know, I think that this could go either way. I could see how people would say she obviously didn't know that he was dead in the snow because she's calling him like crazy. But I don't know if Brendan is going to be able to point it out, but I do believe that she potentially deleted Ring camera video. I did go back and read something that said there was some testimony that there was some missing sections of the Ring camera footage right around the time when she was coming home. Right around the time when she was coming home with a busted taillight, realizing that she hit that man, then getting out of the driveway and going in a very weird specific way as if she looked like she was trying to hit John's car right where she had a busted taillight. And this missing Ring camera footage, was this her alibi? I think he's alive. I'm still calling him.
Defendant calls John, not answered. At 1:17:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. So when voicemail 6 is left with voice.
Miss Gilman?
John, I'm going home. I cannot babysit your niece. I need to go home. You are fucking using me right now. You're fucking another girl. Kim's sleeping next to me. You're a fucking loser. Fuck yourself.
At 1:18:38 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. At 4:38:14 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:38:49 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:39:39 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:40:05 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:42:05 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:42:54 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:45:10 a.m., the defendant calls John. 2:05 a.m., the defendant calls John, not answered. 4:40:05 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 4:42:05 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 4:42:54 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 4:45:10 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:04:27 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:21:28 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:21:58 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:23:26 a.m. The defendant calls John. Voicemail number 7 is left with voice.
Miss Gilman?
The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:21:28 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:21:58 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:23:26 a.m. The defendant calls John. Voicemail number 7 is left with voice.
It's coming.
At 5:24:27 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:25:28 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:26:14 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:28:16 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:28:43 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:29:21 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:29:46 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:30:15 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:30:52 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:31:21 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 5:36:29 a.m. The defendant calls John, not answered. 6:03:02 a.m. The defendant calls John, and voicemail number 8 is left with some voice and noise and background.
Ms. Gilman, could you play that, please?
There was a break, half-hour break.
Yes, I need someone to be 34 beautiful, get back to the answer no. Yeah. Okay, I know. Where's the blanket? I will see blanket there. No.
I find it so disturbing how many times she called him. What did she know? What was she aware of? Did she really think he was alive still? She said in that interview she could have run him over. She was expecting to find him on the side of the road. The feeling of what was waiting for her. So while she's calling him incessantly like that is when she's looking out the window and also screaming in between the front seats, screaming at Carrie and Jen. Well, my final thoughts for today is that this is a tragedy. It's very sad. It's horrific. And there's nothing to be glad about. If she gets found guilty, not guilty, undecided, it's all sad. And may John rest in peace, and may his family find justice for John O'Keefe. And join me to hear more. Listen to my play.
Yeah, there's no one else now. That's what now. All rise to the court, please. Jurors entering.
Knew that
Brian Higgins was there. Where? Mr. Jackson is asking.
Then how did you two not know that Brian Higgins was there?
I don't know what. Where?
At 34.
I'm confused. At what time?
Right.
At what time?
Exactly.
At what time?
When John O'Keefe arrived.
Okay.
At 34 Fairview after midnight on January 29th, 2022.
So when I discovered Brian Higgins was there, wasn't until I read the report.
If you were standing in the house with Sergeant Blank, and you just told these jurors knew that Brian Higgins and everybody else was there.
He had obtained the names. He hadn't written the report yet.
And hadn't told his boss?
I don't recall.
Even though you two went together to interview yet another witness?
That's correct. There was a very fast-moving scene and pace. That is correct.
While you were spitballing, you also didn't secure the camera footage that we've talked about, the Arlo footage.
Yes, that's correct.
You also didn't formally search the house, correct?
Absolutely correct.
We just talked about that. You didn't seek consent by Brian, pardon me, by Brian Albert to search the house, correct?
That's correct.
You also didn't seek a search warrant. You talked about that, correct?
Correct.
You don't get punished or in trouble if you seek a search warrant and a judge who has to sign the search warrant. Normal citizens can't do that. It requires a judge's signature. You don't get in trouble or get spanked or get slapped or get fined if you seek a search warrant that is denied, correct?
In this particular situation, I would need to articulate facts, certain circumstances, and witness statements. What I had was nobody could put John O'Keefe in the house, including Miss Reed, and that we had a glass where they were coming from a bar, and I had 3 separate police. In this particular situation, I would need to articulate facts, certain circumstances, and witness statements. What I had was nobody could put John O'Keefe in the house, including Miss Reed, and that we had a glass where they were coming from a bar, and I had 3 separate police officers, including myself, that had been in that house on 3 separate occasions and saw nothing amiss. I have a good faith obligation to present the truth to a judge, and if I don't, I can be found, end up on a Brady list or a Giglio list, as you know, and my credibility to testify in my career is basically over. So yes, you can get in trouble.
You're talking about lying in an affidavit, sir.
I'm talking about misleading.
Correct.
I would have to twist circumstances to have the right to search Brian Albert's house. We had no reason, and there's been no reason since.
How about this? There's a dead guy on the lawn that looked like he potentially could have been in a physical altercation. How about that? Might that be of some concern to go inside the house and see if there was a struggle that started in the house?
There's still no evidence to go into the house.
You're the guy that's out on the lawn with no coat on. You think the coat might be inside the house? That might be a reasonable assumption? Yes or no?
No.
You got a guy outside with no shoe on. You think the shoe might be inside the house? That might be a reasonable assumption?
I never saw Mr. O'Keefe. I wasn't aware that he
because you didn't
have his
seek
shoes.
to find out the details. Other people knew every single fact that I've just suggested at the time you walked in the house, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
The fact is you didn't seek a search warrant.
I wouldn't. Correct.
The fact is you never searched the house.
That's correct.
The fact is you never searched the basement.
That's correct.
The fact is you never searched the garage.
That's correct.
That's all I have, Your Honor.
Have you ever learned one fact that would have justified searching that house?
Not to this day.
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustained is to form, and you can put the glass in right now, Mr. Vernon.
Thank you. Move that into evidence, please.
Exhibit 58. All right, Lieutenant, you're all set, sir.
Thank you.
Your next witness, Mr. Brennan.
I'd like to play clip 18, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Your Honor, may we alone? Your Honor, may we approach? Ms. Little needs to see the court.
Put it back in session. You may be seated.
All right, Mr. Brennan.
Thank you.
The Commonwealth moves into evidence and asks to play clip 18.
Okay.
So when John got out of the car at Brian Albert's house, he took my full vodka soda, which is sitting in the cup holder.
Thank you. We will
The comment.
take that.
Thank you.
All right, your next witness.
One more, please, Your Honor. The Commonwealth moves into evidence and seeks to play clip number 17, please.
Okay.
I gave an interview with ABC with Matt Gutman. I think this was whom I gave the interview to, and I said, he asked why was I saying at Brian Albert's house. So when John got out of the car at Brian Albert's house, he took my full vodka soda, which is sitting in the cup holder.
Thank you. Okay.
I gave an interview with ABC with Matt Gutman. I think this was whom I gave the interview to, and I said, he asked why was I saying, could I hit him, did I hit him? And I said, yeah, my first thought was, I've been out late, I've been drinking, and he's in the general vicinity of where I last saw him. I mean, they talk about the left side of the property and the right as if it's, you know, Hammersmith Farms. It's a postage stamp. It's 50 feet. So he's in the front yard to the left of the front door, and no one's coming out of the house. Jen's telling me nobody's seen him. So I'm thinking, Jesus, was I starting to pull away and I ran over his foot? Like, he's roughly where I left him. So yeah, when I found him, I was thinking, did I like clip him somehow?
Clips. Okay.
Thank you.
So in order, it has 18 and then 17, or are they in the reverse order on the clip?
If I may see the exhibit. This one exhibit contains clip 12, clip 12A, clip 16, clip 17, and clip 18, all which were previously introduced.
Okay. And it's exhibit number what? Thank you. All right, thank you. Your next witness, Mr. Lally.
Yes, Your Honor. Commonwealth call Mr. Robert Gilman to the stand.
Okay.
Please.
Tell me swear the evidence to give to the court and jury in the case now hears the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Oh.
Super.
All right, Mr. Lally, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury, stating your last name, spelling your last name for the court?
Good morning. My name is Robert Gilman, Gilman.
And what is your occupation, Mr. Gilman?
Meteorologist.
And where did you go to school?
Okay, Trooper Greeno, we're done with extraction reports.
Okay.
Did you have an opportunity to obtain phone messages, phone calls, and text messages between the defendant and Mr. O'Keefe?
Hold on. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor. Trooper Greeno, did you have an opportunity to obtain phone calls, voice messages, and text messages from the defendant to Mr. O'Keefe's phone on the evening of January 29th, 2022?
Yes, I was.
Where did you get the phone call records from?
From John O'Keefe's phone.
Where did you get the voicemails from?
Also from John O'Keefe's phone.
Where did you get the text messages from?
From John O'Keefe's phone.
Did you have an opportunity to take those phone calls, the voice messages, and the text messages and put them in a chronological order?
Yes, I did.
Did you include all of the phone calls, all the text messages, and all of the voicemails?
Between John O'Keefe and the defendant, yes.
Did you create a PowerPoint to put them in a chronological order?
Yes.
May I approach you?
Yes. Show Mr. Leslie.
Sorry. Showing you a binder, sir. Can you open it up? Tell us what this is.
Yes, this is the phone calls and text messages between the defendant and John O'Keefe, as well as the voicemails. Well,
Is there a package in the front of that binder?
yes, there is.
And what is that package?
It says defendant's voicemails and on 1/29/2022. The USB thumb drive that should have those files on.
Sir, I move this binder as the next exhibit that will include both a PowerPoint presentation as well as a clip of the phone calls. No objection, Your Honor.
Should, yes. Do you need the thumb drives?
I don't.
Okay.
Mark this, please.
768. Thank you.
Thank you.
With the court's permission, I would ask that Trooper Greeno take us through the PowerPoint presentation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is it okay to begin? Okay.
Please.
So this is the phone calls on the 29th. So at 12:33:35 a.m., the defendant calls John. That phone call's not answered. 12:34:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:34:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:35:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 12:35:35, the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:36:09 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered.
Trooper Greeno, let me stop you there for a second. Did you look into any internet connection between the defendant's phone and the router and the internet connection at Meadows Ave, John O'Keefe's home that night?
Yes, at 12:36:39 a.m., the defendant's phone auto connects to the Wi-Fi Hatspan 123.
Are you familiar with the router at Mr. O'Keefe's home?
I have not done a look at it in person, but that's the known network that's listed under it. There's two, Hatspan 123 and O'Keefe 74.
Did you learn the range that a connection must be in order to connect to his router?
Yes, so depending on the router, it's either a 2.4 gigahertz or 5 gigahertz radio band, or signal band, I should say. Depending on which one it's connecting to, which band, it's either 150-foot indoor range or up to 300 feet outdoor. So, again, when you pull into your home, sometimes you can still be connected to your home Wi-Fi in the driveway.
And again, can you give us the time of the connection between the defendant's phone and Mr. O'Keefe's router at Meadows Ave that night?
Yes, 12:36:39 a.m.
Please continue.
At 12:36:40 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 12:37:08 a.m., the defendant calls John, and voicemail number 1 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman, would you kindly play the voicemail for 12:37:08?
At 12:38:26 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:39:03 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:39:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:40:43 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 12:41:35 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 2 is left. Some beeping noises, appears to be a butt dial or accidental call.
Ms. Gilman, could you play the voice message at 12:41:35?
The defendant then texts John O'Keefe at 12:55:31 a.m. on the 29th. I'm going home. The defendant texts John O'Keefe, see you later at 12:55:50 a.m. on the 29th. At 12:58:19 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:58:47 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 12:59:24 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 3 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman.
John, I'm here with your fucking kids. Nobody knows where the fuck you are, you fucking pervert.
At 1 a.m. and 26 seconds, the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1 a.m. 49 seconds, the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 4 is left. It's 1 second called, no sound.
Ms. Gilman.
That was it. The defendant texts John O'Keefe, your kids are cucking alone at 1:02 a.m. on the 29th. Defendant texts John O'Keefe, I'm back in Mansfield, the kids are home alone, 1:04:14 a.m. on the 29th. At 1:10:17 a.m., the defendant calls John. Voicemail number 5 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman.
Yeah, it's 1 in the morning. I'm with your fucking niece and nephew. You fucking pervert. You're a fucking pervert.
At 1:10:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. At 1:12:18 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:12:46 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:13:13 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. Sorry. At 1:14:11 a.m., the defendant calls John. It's not answered. 1:14:44 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:10 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 1:16:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. At 1:17:37 a.m., the defendant calls John. So when voicemail 6 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman.
John, I'm going home. I cannot babysit your niece. I need to go home. You are fucking using me right now. You're fucking another girl. Kim's sleeping next to me. You're a fucking loser. Fuck yourself.
At 1:18:38 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. At 4:38:14 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:38:49 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:39:39 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:40:05 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:42:05 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:42:54 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:45:10 a.m., the defendant calls John. 2:05 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:40:05 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:42:05 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:42:54 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 4:45:10 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:04:27 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:21:28 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:21:58 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:23:26 a.m. The defendant calls John. Voicemail number 7 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman.
The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:21:28 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:21:58 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:23:26 a.m. The defendant calls John. Voicemail number 7 is left with voice.
Ms. Gilman.
At 5:24:27 a.m., the defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:25:28 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:26:14 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:28:16 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:28:43 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:29:21 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:29:46 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:30:15 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:30:52 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:31:21 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 5:36:29 a.m. The defendant calls John. Not answered. 6:03:02 a.m. The defendant calls John, and voicemail number 8 is left with some voice and noise and background.
Ms. Gilman, could you play that, please?
Yes, I need someone to be very beautiful, Vietnam, living in Pepper Snow. Where's the blankets? I will see blankets, Eric.
We have the lights on, please. I have no further questions.
All right. Mr. Alessi, does this seem like a good time to take the luncheon recess?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, so folks, we will take a 45-minute luncheon recess.
Court, all right, please. Jurors, close your nobles, follow me.
Goodbye.
Get more of a close-up, Ms. Gill. Sir, can you describe what you're seeing here?
That's the sneaker we located up against the curb. You can see the snow in the background, and that's the flagpole in front of the house. You can see it's still snowing at this time.
Could we see 121, please? And sir, can you describe again what that is?
Just a close-up photo of the sneaker we located up against the curb.
Is that curb the black area to the right?
Correct, sir.
How high is that curb?
I'm not sure, sir. Several inches.
122, please. You described a photograph with a sneaker with snow in it. Is that photograph?
Yes, it is, sir.
Thank you. You can take that down. That night, do you recall if there was any other pieces of taillight recovered?
I believe in total we located maybe 6 or 7 pieces of taillight.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes.
CatLoveDreamingPeach.com.
CatLoveDreamingPeach.com.
CatLoveDreamingPeach.com.